There it is.
Hello.
Right. After much difficulty.
And 3 or 4 takes.
Yeah. So we did an hour-long show last night and got no audio from it, which was great.
Yeah, we had a fun conversation.
Yeah, it was good. It was, depopulation and, well, it was mainly is it a good future or not? We went through a lot of things. So go on.
It depends on your perspective of what good means.
Yeah, it was white pill versus black pill kind of thing. What did we come up with? It's just grey.
Yeah. Which is like black and white mixed together in layers.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's black pill in the short term, I think, and then white pill in the long term. I think that was the conclusion, yeah. Isn't that great? God, we went through all kinds of things, the fixed versus expanding pie, the low-tech stuff that you're a part of. Yeah, so that's why there wasn't a show last night. Do we want to go back over some of that stuff, or perhaps it might be more useful, seeing as this will be the first one that works, that we do a bit of an introduction to you.
Yeah.
Or your back, how you came to be a free thinker. That might be useful.
I'm a friend of Hamish's. We met through mutual friends 2020 and found that we could strongly disagree in an enjoyable way and then have lots of interesting discussions leading from that. And
why don't you give it a bit of background on where you come from, where you grew up, that kind of thing. What
Canterbury
that got you to be a free mind?
Well, if you trace it all the way back, it probably starts from my parents, as it does from anyone. It's like their life starts with your parents. So yeah, Dad's was a reasonably free thinker too, and lots of discussions with him and intellectually challenging stuff. Like he was born in 1950, and so he grew up through different times, and he was a farmer and worked on hydro dams and ski fields and trained to be an aircraft engineer and yada yada yada. So he went through a lot of different areas and saw a lot of stuff, and he'd paid attention as he went around. Like, there's people who've been around, but they've sort of floated around and not paid attention as they went. But then there's the people who looked back and thought, that was interesting, and then gone forward with that and learnt the lessons that life taught them. And I think he sort of did that. And the conventional wisdom of the consumer society was always almost as an assumption in the discussions growing up. Bad in many ways. Like, there was one comment of, if everyone consumed like we did, the economy would crash, because like the house still hasn't quite been finished, but it was very watertight, solid steel and concrete construction. Like, it didn't have any issues in the earthquake, but there's most of the walls still have the first undercoat on them. And the sort of, how much of that's due to Dad not getting around to it, and how much of it's due to letting things go a step at a time. But the growing up with, this is how much we need. Do we need cell phones? No. Do we need fancy new stuff? No. It's like the TV got replaced because it was not. Well, first we got the Freeview box. It was an old CRT, and then we eventually. Did that TV ever got replaced while I was living there? No. It was. They got the TV when they got married, and it was the same TV they had when I left home.
Right.
So, it ain't broke. What's wrong with it? And then Dad complaining about the intrusiveness of modern communications, and not like in the newer TVs hurting his eyes. And it's like he had a cell phone which was off all the time and sat in an old sock in the glove box. And then someone else brought along a like cell phone case, like, here, now you can get rid of the old sock. Oh, great. So he put the cell phone in the little case, like meant to put on your belt, then he put that in the old sock, just to everyone's hilarity. But Yeah, it's like that sort of. He's an engineer, so he's technically minded and understands how a lot of stuff works, but that acknowledgement of the downsides of progress probably set me up for being more open to viewing that in the future.
I could see that. No, that makes a lot of sense given what I know about you. So you think you got a lot of it from him, from family discussions growing up?
Yeah. And it's like I never had the rebellious teenage phase. My rebellious teenageness was intellectual rather than drinking.
Well, that's good. Actually, that was what I was going to ask you next. When was the first time that you sort of had a divergence from that path discussion with your father?
I guess peak oil and sustainability and those sort of things. Like early teens, I was that kid whose only topic of conversation was peak oil. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And I've sort of matured with that as this is happening. I can see the four shots hitting. The evidence is blatant. And so it was never a question of, what? We might run out of energy? It's like, yes, we already are, and so on. And so I think for a lot of people, they come at it from the perspective of the conventional wisdom is true, and then to take that down is very painful because it ends up being something that you perceive your survival and your future prosperity rely upon. And so the idea of that being pulled out from under you is extremely painful and triggers the stages of grief, the denial, the bargaining, the anger, and it takes a long time to get through those for most people.
Oh, that's funny. That made me think of what I said the other day about public schools. The idea that the system of public schooling forces you into a box through force, because that's all that happens there. And that box is believe what you're told. Everything is good the way that it is.
And the answer's in the back of the book.
Yeah. We have all the answers. It's already all done. Believe what the authorities tell you. And this is what our authorities have told us for ages. That everything's fine the way it is. We don't need radical change. We don't need change at all. So you're talking about a person stepping outside of that paradigm and having anxiety. In my mind, that links back to that situation. Person stepping outside of the control that's been placed upon them feels the stress and anxiety of, I'm not in a safe place anymore because I was told when I thought for myself that wasn't safe. Or not told, but just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, well, that links in because I was homeschooled from halfway through year 7. So
there you go.
Yeah,
that's where you're from.
Not from the perspective, we don't want them in school, but from the perspective of, I've got dyslexia with other stuff, so it makes a confusing mix for the teachers. And in order to fit in the school box, I would have needed to be broken.
You didn't watch my video from the other day, did you? That sounds very familiar. That was exactly my point, is that most people need to be broken to be fit in the box. I was in a similar situation to you, but I didn't have the luxury of homeschooling. So, yeah, that was great fun.
Yeah.
Do we want to, okay, seeing as we did it yesterday, we might as well do it again. You mentioned peak oil. We want to talk about energy, seeing as that's a big topic for you. And the work you're doing at the moment, though I know you can't talk a lot about that.
Okay, so the basic background is I recently got a job with a engineering startup to design and then build modern steam engines as locomotives, as whatever. Like some of the stuff on the website, the big picture on the front is a picture of a little steam locomotive pulling a train of sugarcane from the field. And so after that's pressed to get rid of the juice, then you've got all this burnable material that you can stick in the train, so then you use that to transport it instead of getting diesel. And it can take away your diesel costs. That's saving a lot of money. This makes great economic sense. With current diesel prices, and biomass prices, it's definitely more economic to run a steam engine than to run a diesel engine. As you change the market, supply and demand will shift. Of course, the diesel demand will go down a little bit, the biomass demand goes up a little bit, but there's enough of a margin there that it would make sense for a long time. And I know you've got different stuff about the origin of oil, though the past statistical analyses and such of production from oil fields peaking and declining seems to be a reasonable indicator to the future. And you pick the lowest hanging fruit first, leaving behind the harder to extract stuff. So it makes sense that over time, the average stuff would get harder to get. And then if there's a little crisis, then its consumption goes down and the hardest to get stuff stops being produced because it's the most expensive. And so then the price goes down. The future's not going to be all steam, but I think it can definitely contribute. And like the idea that in a third world developing country, whichever terminology you want to use, you could have locally produced locomotives or steam power plants running on locally grown biomass, where the ash is then returned to the soil, import a little bit of seaweed to add to the nutrient cycle, and you've got a closed loop carbon and nutrient cycle that can go on basically indefinitely.
Yeah, well, assuming you consistently import seaweed, but I'm sure you can.
Yeah, well, the seaweed is
yeah, the idea of the low-tech solution for low-tech environments, like you say, developing countries.
I also think of it as this is more future gazing, and so of course predictions are difficult, especially about the future. But I would see that I want to get it up and running and refined so that then it can come in the future as the first world does that too. That's possibly more arguable by different people, but that's part of the motivation for me.
Right. So this brings us back to the conversation last night of collapse or no kind of setup.
Yeah.
I seem to remember you were talking about an ideal scenario would be that rather than falling from the Tower of Babel kind of situation, we walk down the stairs by choice. Although I think we agreed that that's not going to happen.
Depends on how you define it, because like there'll certainly be individuals clinging to the highest spire of it as it starts to fall and carries them with it to a crater. And then there's people who never really got up it in the first place, and then and some of them will be crushed by the debris. And then there's people who got most of the way up and go, oh, hell no, this is getting creaky and greasy, and I don't like it anymore, and starting climbing down to varying degrees. So there's a large distribution of different people. It's like each individual needs to be assessed as an individual. You can look at broad populations, say, okay, here's the range, and here's how the population as a whole seems to be acting. But there is enormous variation within that in any situation.
Sure. Well, I think that's a good point to say. It's funny trying to redo the same conversation that we did the other night. Perhaps we should talk about something else.
Yeah.
Either way, I think we both agree there is a generally large collapse coming, though individual markets may survive.
Yeah.
And that's why you're looking at this kind of technology, though.
Yeah, I think we disagree. We disagree about the causes of said collapse, but the prognosis and useful actions to take in response seem to align reasonably well.
Yeah. I seem to remember a good amount of discussions on that, whereas I was more morality focused and you were more resource-based focused. I remember that. Is that still the case, do you think?
Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive either.
No, I think it's all tangled up in the same thing, but the current symptoms I think we all see pretty well. It's going to be an interesting couple of years for all.
Yeah. There certainly seems to have been, it will only be accurately evident in retrospect, but it seems like we've got the trend line of society and there's perturbations to it that sort of knock it off course, but it sort of comes back to the middle like a ship bobbing up and down in the ocean. But then it seems like the ship's turned a corner now, and while the bombing is still happening, so there's noise that makes it difficult to tell that it's on a new course, there's a lot of stuff that isn't working the way it used to. Like the global shipping, people are waiting for it to get back on track. Yeah, but it keeps not quite making it. 60% of airline pilots are still flying after COVID. That means 40% are gone. So there are going to be 40% less flights. Unless they can retrain people.
Yeah, I think I would agree on that, because it's only going to spiral in terms of cost to benefit. Less flights, more cost per seat, less people want to do it. Off it goes, especially with the economic impact coming.
Yeah, and the more people hang on to those, the more they hang on to the luxuries, like the more someone's like, I will have my holiday in Hawaii, the worse it'll be for them, because they'll be paying through the nose for it while inflation is taking their wealth out elsewhere, and then they'll have to put it on the mortgage and so on. It'll make everything more difficult.
Yeah, and they won't be focusing on, say, growing their own food or ensuring that the community has their back in case of, well, what's likely to come. I thought it was interesting, you've talked about this last night as well, that you see that the trend has changed. I assume you're saying that in reference to the small scale of time, because I think I remember our conversations about societal collapse before. If you take the long scale view of human history, do you think that it's relatively on trend, rise and fall of empires kind of situation, or do you think that this is actually something new in terms of all history?
Both, depending on your definitions of all the terms involved. In terms of the engineer's answer, sorry. In terms of the broad scale trend of cyclical history of the rise and fall of empires and civilizations, yeah, we're just another one. It's like civilizations are born, they rise, they reach their peak, and they decline, just like any living human. And the denial of that, and the narcissism to think that we're different to that, and sure, we have different technologies, but every civilization was totally different on the way up. Ancient Egypt was nothing like the Inca and so on, because going up is driven by creativity and new innovation, and you've got the ability to expand. Which direction do you want to expand in? But then when stuff starts getting tough, you get the responses are driven by the fight or flight reflex, the panic modes in the brain. And that has not changed in thousands or millions of years. And so that response, as things peak out and start to decline, the patterns that play out are the same ones that are playing out in ancient Roman history and so on. It's people fighting over the scraps, and some people saying, yeah, that ain't worth it, and just walking away. And like one of your points last night about more versus less people, that's a whole nother discussion, but a trend that a friend has noticed, and I can see it too, of the smart people walking away, right? More people implies more geniuses to solve more problems. But if the smart people are seeing that the system is not worth participating in, then that defeats the whole purpose of that. So a friend of mine at uni was studying mechatronics. He was one of those geeks who no one else would be able to use his computer because the mouse was switched off. It had a DIY built operating system and everything was keyboard commands. But he's now trained to be a dock ranger. So he ran away to the bush because, yeah, I don't want to slog in an office.
Well, I think actually that might actually be a bit of a white pill thing. I was thinking about this a bit last night, and it's just sort of clicked in my head now. When you're talking about all the talented people checking out of the system, going, this is broken, it's over, I'm out, I'm going back to nature, I'm going back to the thing. What I see there is a preparation for the next system, that an acknowledgement of, okay, we're on the decline, our society believes that it is perfect and cannot be improved, and any attempts for me to improve it is resulting in more pain than it's worth. I see it collapsing. Smart people then leave the system, go back to the base reality, so that when the society collapses, they're likely to be okay. And then they can come in and be the founders of the next one.
Yeah, in
even
500 or 1,000 years.
Pardon?
In 500 or 1,000 years.
I don't think it's going to take that long. I think very easily, like the massive high scale level of society might take that long to come up. But if we had a societal collapse within the next 2 years, full collapse, everything falls apart, and we have pockets of people in small towns around the place that band together, and then in each of those towns you might have one of these people that you're referencing that has disappeared off to the small town to be closer to the food. I could see very easily that that person would stand up and go, okay, these are the things that happened that caused this collapse. I've been looking at this my whole life. Here's my proposal of how we get past that. And then you might have, say, 50 of these spread across the nation, small little enclaves of people who have visions for a greater version, for the next iteration of society. This is my big issue with our society at the moment, is we say that things like our political system, it's the best it'll ever be. The founders founded our nation with this political system and it cannot be changed. It's the best it'll ever be. Clearly that's going to rise and then crash. There's no way around that. You cannot update it. It's dead. And it'll
whether or not it was the best it could ever be at the time it was made, it was the best they could do then. But then the situation changes.
Yeah, if you can't update for the new information, then, well, that's the conversation we had last night. Living on the corpse of your ancestor does nothing but rot. It needs to be revivified with, well, yeah, with young ideas, with new ideas, regardless of how much that hurts the society. Obviously not done by force, but I think I do see it as a white pill. If the most valuable and skilled people check out of the system, then yes, the system is going to collapse more readily. But they're checking out because they know it's going to collapse, which means that they are there for the people who survive it.
I'd put the timeline at 1 to 3 centuries is the figure that I've heard put around, based on analyses of how historical collapses of civilizations played out. Large margin of error.
So when you say that, do you mean on the decline or until from peak to peak? Like there's a large
peak to bottoming out. So the steepest part of the curve would probably take between 50 and 200 years, probably both at once in different areas. And then the bottom out can be 3 centuries from now, or 2.5 probably, because we're already starting to slide down in various ways. But
it's a rather large timescale to my mind.
There's a lot to fall down, and there are negative feedback loops in the process, right? There are definitely positive feedback loops that speed it up, but there are negative feedback loops of a lot of people trying to cobble it back together as it falls apart. And as bits fall down and parts of the system stop working anymore, then those resources can be concentrated into smaller areas. And sure, there's going to be a lot of loss along that path, but then you can cobble together something that'll bring about a small recovery for a while before it continues again.
All right. That makes me think of the political arguments at the moment. It's almost universally, we are on a decline and going to disaster. Let's try and stop that. And you're saying it's effectively inevitable. I don't disagree. I think, honestly, our society has done pretty well for a long time, but it is time to be reformed. Death and birth happens. Almost every culture has this kind of myth. It makes me think of I think it's Hare Krishna's one, where they have the cycle in the Kali Yuga, where society crashes, it dies, we rebuild it. I'd be okay with it if it wasn't for such the loss of life.
Yeah. Well, historically, the population decline wasn't everybody dies. It was, you look at a school photo and hang on a minute, half these people are dead. And it's a bit more difficult to have kids, or people choose not to have kids. So there's writings that are left from ancient Rome of intellectuals of the time lambasting people for not having children. And it's like, oh, these people, they're a curse on society, not having children. And it's like, that's a deep physiological response to a time of crisis. Like, do I want to have kids now and not be able to keep going because I'm investing that extra in having kids? Or, okay, you have kids. Well, okay, we'll work together as a society for mutual survival while I try and fight for my scraps and you try and fight for your scraps. and the few kids that remain will keep going forward. But by the time the 95% or so decline takes place, the 5% that are left are generally the ones who never forgot how to feed themselves. So it's not the high aristocrats who speak in the Forum of Rome and so on, and the people who are managing the gladiators or whatever. It's the farmers out in the field who are like, oh, the tax collector hasn't shown up in a few years. I wonder what's up. And I heard the emperor got kicked out again. Oh, that's funny. And they just keep doing their thing. And of course, we're so much more interconnected these days that process will fly out differently, but the same pattern is at play.
Do you see that the interconnection of today actually as what a hopeful whiteboard that they might change that pattern? As you were talking about the high-minded intellectuals that live in the city and don't produce their own food in the olden days. When the collapse comes, they will die, obviously. But with the communication technology we have now, you can have people who are farmers who work with the food, who produce it, who can also simultaneously educate themselves. I see that as a huge, huge victory, because if when this collapse does come, the average farmer has far more information about society in large, about the systems that make it up, about philosophies of how to act, than some peasant several hundred years ago when Rome collapsed. I see that as far more valuable, a way better way of maintaining, preserving knowledge. That through this collapse, we may end up in a situation where much more knowledge is preserved. Same with what we said before about the intelligent people checking out. They're checking out to those jobs that have the food, and also they can still stay in touch through communication technology and keep themselves educated, so that when collapse comes, there is far more knowledge in the peasantry that survives than there would be during any previous collapse.
This is one of those areas where individuals can actually make a difference. Like, if a particular book of sanitation, say, gets its way through the next few centuries out to 4 centuries from now, and people in this village are using that to manage the sanitation of the village, then the health and welfare of the people within that community can be substantially improved, and then that can spread outwards. Like hot running water from a little solar heater, or something that makes hot water with your fireplace, and a few simple things that someone with a hammer and a fire can make a massive difference to the ongoing society. That's like one book, right? That's not you transmit the glory of the internet. It's like, no, that's all going away. Like, if you're lucky, in 50 years, someone with a hard drive, a computer, and a printer will be able to print off a few dozen of the most important books. Maybe more. Maybe they'll print off a whole library. Or maybe someone will have a microfilm archive of important books, because that you can just read with a piece of magnifying glass. Apparently, the recording of the meeting is limited to 40 minutes, and it'll run out in 10 minutes. So I'll have to bear that in mind. But
well, that's good. That gives us a time limit for these things.
Yeah, there's definitely white pills and black pills, and it entirely depends on your perspective. But like we're at a time where the power of the individual has been leveraged in many ways. So it's not that you can change the society at large now. That's a bit of a behemoth that's falling apart in many ways and will sort of shrink itself down to something. But the little things now can sort of keep going, and then what's a little thing now can be a massive thing in the future. Like the idea of a water wheel, like previous civilizations, like ancient Rome, didn't have that, right? They had pretty much all of their power came from muscles of some kind, either animals or humans, like those big hamster wheel cranes that they had, right? Those will still work in the future, but then it's like, okay, why don't we just put a water wheel in, and people know what that is? It's like it's a pedal, it's a set of pedals on a wheel, right? Put it in a river. Oh, we've got power now. There's clever designs that can get more power out. There's things. But even if you don't have those, you have the basic idea and then you refine it. And we've got enough basic ideas that it can be carried forward, like the idea of canning. Like you have a glass jar with a lid, you heat it up, you store the food. Like that, it's a tiny little thing, but it can make such a big difference. And there's so many things like that around now, that someone who keeps beekeeping alive or knows how to weave just for fun, and those are the skills being kept alive that will go through to the future and be really valuable. And we'll go through a process over the next few hundred years or whatever, depending on your timeline, of people who find it interesting and people who find value in them, filtering out the most valuable things from the modern knowledge base. So nuclear physics is probably not going to make it through, or the subtleties of game design probably won't make it through. But the design of a steam engine, like the idea of how to design it well, if you have functioning steam engines powering functioning lathes and mills, those things, if they're well built, can last for 100 years or more. So you just maintain them and they keep working. And you get a few of those through, and you can melt down steel and a bit of understanding of alloys, and half of that can be regained from some hints that you got from a book, and then you experiment. It's like, oh, I did it this way and it broke. Oh, I did it that way and it didn't, but it corroded. Oh, this way didn't corrode, but it's not quite as strong. You learn, right? Poke it and find out. And then with those starting hints, then you get that leg up, so that in the future, it's plausible that we'll have what I've seen, ecotechnic societies. Technic in the sense of they get their energy from non-muscular sources, or at least not only muscular, but eco in the sense of, well, that clobbered those guys, let's not make all the same mistakes, let's make some different ones. And sure, there'll be small-scale ecological disasters. I say small-scale because the resources to do them on such a large scale are unlikely to be around anymore. But if you have a city full of skyscrapers and you want some steel, you just go out with a hammer. A hammer and a saw, and you've got a piece of steel. And that, like, the resources have been mined up out of the ground and concentrated. Things like, you're not getting the silver back out of photographic film. That's too widely dispersed. There's things like that that we won't get back. But the lumps of steel, like, those are a great resource for the future.
Actually, having the cities, never thought about that. The city's becoming effectively a mine, an empty ghost town where you can go and get resources from in the future for small communities.
Yeah, I can see Christchurch becoming that.
You see, yeah, you just have to step over all the bodies.
The decline's too slow for that. Like, it'll be the sea level rise, so people leave, then people go back and then find an old shed that's full of paint tins of solvents, and gold mine.
One asterisk on that.
Yeah.
I would agree that in general, the decline could be as slow as that. But do you think this decline is going to be as slow as that, particularly with some of the links that you sent me recently?
I think that there will be areas and times when it happens very quickly and scarily. So places where certain things are strained and then suddenly it just doesn't work there anymore. A prime example that comes to mind is Los Angeles, right? If Lake Mead goes dry, there's no power, there's no water. People will go. Like, that area is dead, right? They can throw their money at things, they can send their lawyers out in armies, and it ain't going to make a difference fundamentally. Like, you might have a few hangers on who are whining at the government to support them, but that's a losing battle, because it's just, you're not living in a desert.
No.
Not like
I think it's interesting that the way I see it, there are so many forces at play aimed at producing this collapse as fast as possible that I don't think it's going to be as slow a collapse with people trying to hold on and make it okay like last time, like every time before that. I see far too many people with undue influence over our political systems or our society at large who are actively aiming at the collapse happening right now.
I think that stuff will fall down, but like a demolished building, it'll fall down, and the people that are left with it, what just happened? And then it's like, okay, we need some food. And there'll be people out there with food. And I'm not saying that it will sort of stop halfway. I'm saying a section collapses, and then people are left blinking, wondering what the hell happened, and they go get some food. Like, they'll work something out, and the ones that won't make it. And then there'll be something left where there'll be a recovery. So the big moral of that, or the takeaway of that to me that's really hopeful, is that we're not trying to set up a survivalist bunker to survive that. You're looking to survive that, and then that, and then that. And so you just need to get that far. And if you get your practice in living that far below what you could, or close to it, like, eat cheaply, learn to eat preserved foods or preservable foods, like dry beans, right? They're cheap, they're easy to grow and ship. You can have a good store of them, some potatoes in the garden, like, just get your basics sorted. If you need to, how far could you walk, right? If stuff went wrong where you were, do you know how far you can walk? And those sort of things.
Yeah, where do you get your water from? Do you have a store of salt for preserving foods?
Yeah.
All kinds of things like that.
Yeah, you don't need to be faster than the bear, you just need to be faster than the slowest half of the campus.
Yes, if you're in the city.
Yeah.
I think the real solution is to have a community.
And be useful. Yeah, an individual. Yeah.
I think you need a community of people that are willing to support each other. And if you don't, then people will just tear each other's throats out to get the food. And that's not going to work.
It can go that far. But in general, I think there was a video I saw, YouTube channel, like Stories of Old. He did a look at how people responded in disasters, right? Which would be relevant to this discussion. And he found that generally individuals come together to help. Sure, there are people who do some looting, but the legal responses or the law enforcement responses to stop that make things worse generally, because, like, oh, stop the looting. It's like, yeah, they're looting the big box store. I don't care. And frankly, it's like, if you have children floating face down dead in the street, I think there are more important things than a few items moving off the shelf without the benefit of money changing hands.
Yes.
And, like, there'll be people who take the opportunity to do that, but, like, in sort of primate societies, and this applies just as much to humans in stress situations because it's the same brain structures, the big strong male who beats everyone up can be taken down by two littler guys when he's having a bad day. So the big strong guy who carefully chooses which idiot to beat up and protects the others will have 10 guys behind him to back him up. And then he becomes a small local warlord even. And that structure is better for the people under him than the previous structure in many cases, where they were struggling to get enough food because they've got so many payments, they can't afford their car, and like working themselves to the bone every day to try and survive. And it says we've got less than a minute. Part two.
Okay, yeah. We'll have to figure out another way to do this at some point, but it'll work for now. I just wanted to make the point that when I said that I think people will go at each other for food, I don't see that happening in the small towns or in the country. You were talking about people banding together in a crisis to help each other, which I agree, that's what everyone will do. Problem is, 400,000 people banding together in a city isn't going to really work because they won't be able to organize themselves that well, and they don't have any food. So all they can do is band together and aim at someone else and go steal it. And I don't see that ending peacefully.
It will happen somewhere.
Yeah, also, how do they get to the food? If they're in the city and a collapse happens, how are they getting out of the city? Are they going to walk? Is it going to be a peaceful march with everyone just walking out to the country and then all of a sudden the people in the country giving them food by choice? I don't see that. I see most not making it along the way. And I see much violence happening within that first. I guess it depends on how quick the collapse comes. Like you're saying, if it is a slow burn, then the adjustment period is slow enough that people will negotiate out of it. But if it is a fast one, then people will get desperate, starving, and then violent, which is not ideal.
Yeah, and there will be places possibly precipitated by conflict or war of some kind where that will happen. and like war is the prime cause of that sort of crisis, like walking for a week to try and get away from the war zone and so on. Yeah, it'll happen somewhere. That's where things like knowing how far you can walk come in handy. Like, okay, how much would you need to carry? What's your bug out location? Like my parents live out of the city, so my bug out is head out that way. Like put my pack on the back. Like if the roads are open, load up the car and drive. If the roads aren't open, put my pack on the back, take my 4-year-old's hand and start walking. So I'm not a target. I'm just trying to walk through here. And you keep walking, you sort of be friendly to the people you meet. And it's like, yeah, I'm just trying to walk here. And be useful for people too. Like that's another thing that's in crisis situations. Like I've heard the Somali pirates are very nice to doctors because doctors can set their broken bones and help them not be sick and heal their sick child. All right. So having a useful skill, or brew beer when the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse arrive, offer beer. If a bunch of slightly drunk youths arrive at your door screaming, offering more alcohol is probably a good way to get on their good side. Yeah, it's not a good situation overall, I certainly agree, but it's like the ones who have a little bit more now will say, he's got beer and he knows how to make more, don't beat him up.
Yes, and also more intoxication is not exactly going to help the violence problem.
Yeah. Probably more applicable to slightly less dramatic circumstances. Like if there's sort of growing disquiet, but your neighbors know that you make beer and you will share it out to them for help with stuff, and then that's the sort of little seed around which a little community can form. So people knowing that, oh, Fred down the road makes beer. Yeah, we like him.
I think food is probably more a focus, but that's beside the point.
Oh, yeah. If you don't have food and water, those are the primary ones. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You got to know where that comes from. This is why I'm still amazed you live in the city.
I've underdone
and then you see this pattern playing out, and you're still like, yeah, I'll just stay in the city. It'll be fine. You know, my bug out location is my house. It's great. Don't need one. You know, I'm in a small valley. There might be 2,000 people here, and I don't know, 50,000 animals or more.
Yeah.
You know, I know every day, within walking distance, there is probably 100 to 200,000 liters of milked every day. And you know, if we have some kind of bad event, you organize the community enough and turn that into cheese. How many years is that going to last a small community? A lot. Not to mention all of the animals that we have, which is ridiculous amounts. Wool, resources. We have a forest here for lumber. We have a lumber mill right down the road. We got natural spring water that's warm, which is interesting. We got rivers everywhere, and it is a long way to walk to. You know, the nearest town is half an hour away by drive, which is a long walk, and it's still a small population. Big proper towns a couple hours by drive, and that's not going to be walked easily. It's funny that we just talked about collapse. Like you say, Great Mill. In the long run, it could be quite good. It depends on what knowledge we manage to bring over the gap. And again, I think this is our big difference, is that you've always been focused on the practical knowledge, on what systems, what technologies would be things that we could practically bring over the gap. Like, as much as I think nuclear is a great idea, my small town's not going to be building a nuclear plant anytime soon. But your point about steam engines, water wheels, that's always been your focus of what technologies can we bring across to alleviate suffering and build up. We might have to go in a minute. Baby's not too happy wondering what's happening. Whereas I think it's always been morality.
One of the
when our current society collapses due to the failing of its morality, of its rules, of its structure, resource issue as a result of that in my mind, but we can disagree on that. How do you design a society that doesn't do that again? At least in the temporary sense, how do you implement rules in a small town who is trying to survive that ensures that it thrives and doesn't kill each other. That has always been my focus of bringing across the divide the philosophy that's required to not collapse immediately again.
Yeah, that's definitely an important component of it, and I think there's an element of each to their own specialty where we differ there.
For sure.
Like, one of the more advanced things that is likely to transmit to the future and be a little bit of a game changer in a lot of ways, well, two of them that come to mind for that. A gun, like one guy with a gun can take out the local warlord. So the idea of a knight on his horse being the big shot in the local area because he's trained martial arts all his life. Like one guy with a gun can take out one guy who's trained all his life with martial arts. So a hunting rifle changes that dynamic substantially. But going forward beyond that, hello there. The idea of a shortwave radio or any form of radio, like a small university town can have a section where they manufacture electrical valves and make a few radios a year. Like we're not talking massive production, but enough to give each small town a radio to talk to the next few towns, and each larger town a radio that will talk to the next city. And then you can have international communication at the push of a button, given the right time of day and atmospheric conditions in that. But that's a little bit of a game changer. Even if all you have is Morse, like tapping away on a Morse key can get your message across an ocean, and that changes things. Like knowing that events occurred, knowing that someone's coming, and how that'll play out will remain to be seen. But those are small technologies with large impacts, like germ theory and so on. It's like small technologies or small concepts that have large impacts. And so future's going to be a very interesting place.
Sorry. What were you saying? You're talking about things to get across the gap.
Yeah.
It's interesting we always end up talking about this collapse. Or we have recently at least. All right. You're going to be annoying and noisy otherwise.
Yeah. Well, there's not many people that you can talk about it with openly. So it's like you find someone with a sufficiently aligned mindset to get stuff off your chest and do that process of talking and discussing. And yeah, that idea makes sense, but this one doesn't. That is part of the process of thinking itself. Like this sort of communication is essential to the process.
I think it's all well and good to plan for the collapse and the rebuild, which I think is what we should be focused on in general, because that way we can build the best future possible, even though it is so far out of our reach. Under great men building, planting trees under which they will not sit, kind of thing. But I think it is also something we should focus on doing our best to slow the collapse as fast as, to slow it as much as possible. Because if it is a fast collapse, things will get rather catastrophic and violent. But if we can slow it down by correcting some of these horrific policies, then it makes the curve longer and slower, which makes it more peaceful in general.
There is a bit of a internal conflict I have on that. Like I see the harm that the collapse will cause, the very humanitarian harm, the environmental harm from people getting desperate and chopping down trees to heat them houses and so on. So in one sense, it's worth prolonging that or postponing that as long as possible. But in another sense, there is a strong concern that the longer it is delayed, the worse it will be when it hits, like the addict delaying getting off the drugs.
Oh, I'm not saying delaying the collapse. I'm saying slow the rate of it. Because, I mean, that's what we've been doing with the financial policy. We keep having economic collapse and we go, no, we'll print our way out of it. We'll do quantitative easing, we'll do all this. And that just makes the bubble bigger for when it bursts again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't burst the bubble. I'm saying slow it. Try and make sure that during this slowdown, we actually still have food and energy.
Oh, yeah.
We can still eat, rather than shutting down. Rather than shutting down all of the food production for our nations or kneecapping industry and oil. when we will, need that to not freeze or starve.
Mm.
Find a way to have a collapse where we move away from the decadence without simultaneously genociding the poor through denying them resources while the rich take it through force.
Yeah, and the recognition of that a lot of the things we take for granted now will go away at some point, and think, okay, how can I adapt to that now? While, say you want to start feeding yourself from your garden and believe that in the future that will be essential or you'll starve, right? If you if you get a pack of seeds and put them in a cupboard and forget about it, then you go to plant them and the seeds rot and the crops get blight and you get 10% of what you hoped for and you're starving anyway. Or you do that the first year you get the seeds and think, oh, well, that didn't work. What went wrong? And then you learn from those mistakes and find out, oh, that's what I did wrong. Those need to be over there so they get the sun, and those need to be over there so they don't get too much sun. And that one had too much water, so its roots rotted, da-da-da. And you learn to the point where you can, because you've done it before, know how to put a crop in the ground and get food out, like plant potatoes so that you can have them in the ground stored by themselves. And then you have some hidden away in a root cellar, say, and just sort of build it up. Know how to can food in a glass jar and so on. And yes, if a raging horde comes along, they can come steal some of your food. But if you've got an ongoing production system in your garden, then the food that's not ready yet is still there properly.
Yeah,
of course,
but
disasters can happen.
That's not a problem.
Say again?
Oh, if you have an armed local community that's willing to stand up for each other, then the raging horde's not so much of an issue.
Yeah.
Another advantage of being in the country. Even though we're not allowed to defend ourselves in this nation, a lot of farmers still have their rifles from when that was, allowed.
Yeah.
So that's a useful thing.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's like the thought of getting a 22 rifle just so I can shoot rabbits. It's like that has some appeal. And then it's like, I have this, go away. Go away. Yeah, it's like
that's
that.
why we got some rabbits.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, I'm more of a pacifist by nature, so it's like, I really don't want that. But yeah.
Yeah, might not always have a choice.
Yeah.
I'd say it's been a good conversation. I should probably go and do family stuff. Yeah, you want to go and do stuff. Rabbits. We're going to go see lots of animals at the AMP show today.
Oh.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Hopefully sometime at an AMP show you'll get to see the steam engine. Yeah.
That would be interesting, yeah. In full circle.
Yeah.
I think I think we've had a good conversation. And you said you wanted to try and do this once a week, something like that.
Yeah, worth aiming for. Weekly, fortnightly. Yeah.
Whatever end up working, but I think people definitely want to hear from you. And I enjoy this.
Well, if you think people would be interested in listening to me monologue.
I think once you've done it a few times, you'll feel less need to expout.
Yeah, then we can if you can set topics, then I'll ramble on them.
All right, we can do that. I think your rambling will slow down over time.
Yeah.
As you get more used to it. All right, kiddo. I'll pop you down. I'll come and help you. You want to change nappy, eh? Oh, okay. We're going in the car currently.
Okay.
Okay.
You take care of Daddy.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be a world?
Yeah.
I was good to chat to you. And yeah, we'll do this again. Hopefully we'll try and find a different topic. I think we've done this one pretty well. And I don't always want to be focusing on the collapse. I think that alienates people quite a lot.
The nature of material reality.
Oh yeah, we can do the metaphysics thing next time. I seem to remember that quite a lot. I'd like to in a moment, sweetheart. I'd like to try and focus on temporary solutions. It's something I've been thinking about. So many people go, this is what's wrong with the world, this is what's wrong with the world. Here's the perfect future scenario ideological solution. It's like, okay, that's not being implemented tomorrow. We want, stepping stones. Yeah, all right. Anyway, I should run and go and do the most important thing, which is more good people.
Okay.